the Prime Minister of Israel, Netanyahu, gave a very controversial speech about nuclear testing in Iran. He talked about how America has always been there for Israel and how their livelihood was at stake if Iran was to get nukes. You should listen to me because America is heavily tied with Israel, and the people that you vote into office can have a big impact on Israel, and one cannot make an informed vote without knowing a little bit of history. Today I'm going to talk about the history of Israel. First, I'm going to talk about how the Middle Eastern stage was set for Israel during and after World War I. Then I'm going to talk about how Israel came into being out of the fire of World War II. And finally, I'm going to talk about how Palestine and Israeli conflicts clashed in the Cold War to near the present. So first I'm going to talk about how the Middle Eastern stage was set during and after World War I. So before there was an Israel, there was only a Palestine. And before there was a Palestine, there was only the Ottoman Empire. And now the Ottoman Empire was imperialized by German forces, much like the Hawaii or the Philippines was influenced by America. Under Ottoman rule, relations between ethnic groups such as Muslims and Jews, even though the proportions were much different than they are today, it was quite peaceful. There was a peaceful coexistence. That is until, there's a peaceful coexistence. So before World War I started, the idea of Zionism came into play. Zionism was the belief that there should be a state for Jews where they can live in peace and harmony and not have to be watching their back all the time. Because if you know history, you know that they're not treated that well. So when World War I broke out, things didn't really change in the Ottoman Empire. It turns out that during World War I, before it was over, the British and the French made an agreement. They said, we are going to split up the Ottoman Empire once we win this war. And it was split up into French and British regions. The British had the British Mandate, which had control of Palestine, while the French had northern areas like Syria. So once the British got this region, they promised it to two people. First, they promised that they would, with the Balfour Declaration, that they would come forth and make a home state for Jews. And then they promised it to Hussein, the king of Mecca, that if he was to lead a revolt against the Ottoman Empire, which was German influenced, that they would get rewarded with a nice bit of land in that area. He was upset when that promise fell through, and that land went to the Jews and the Zionists. And that was the beginning of further conflict between Arabs and Israelis. So because the Balfour Declaration came into play, there was mass immigration after World War I into the state of Palestine, and between World War I and World War II, especially near the end of that time because Hitler was a dick. So so there's mass immigration. So now that I've talked about how the Middle Eastern stage was set for Israel, I'm now going to talk about how Israel actually was born out of the fire of World War II. So during World War II, things were actually quite peaceful because Germans had no desire to go in that part of the region of the world. However, after World War II, the British saw that having this British mandate was a problem, and they wanted to get rid of it. So they tossed the problem to the newly established United Nations. And the United Nations split up. They split up the region of the British Mandate into two parts. It was called the Petition Plan. Now, the petition plan looks like a mess, and it looks like a fight that's ready to happen, and sure enough, it did. As soon as the petition plan was put into place, a few years after, the Arab-Israeli War broke out. Now, when the Arab-Israeli War broke out, it ended with a ceasefire about a year later. As you can see, Egypt took the Gaza Strip, Jordan took the West Bank, and Israel expanded quite a bit. So during this, the Palestinians that were in Gaza and the West Bank lost their homes and their statehood. So they became refugees. Thank you. So while Palestinians saw this as the destruction of their home, Israel saw the Arab-Israeli War as a rebirth of their nation, kind of a Louisiana Purchase. It made it bigger. So now that I've talked about how it came into being after World War II, I'd like to talk about the increase in conflict between Palestinians and Israelis during the Cold War and to the present. So after that war passed, the Arab-Israeli War passed, there was another conflict. Tensions kept on rising with those borders for 18 years. And then Israel did something remarkable. It expanded itself at least twofold. Not only did it take back the Gaza Strip and the West Bank, but it went into the entire Sinai Peninsula, and it took the Golden Heights from Syria. Thank you. Now, that was a huge expansion, and it caused a lot of resentment in that area. For Israel. They just took a bunch of land. Now the UN stepped in, and they're like, okay, we can't have all this fighting. So they came up with Resolution 242. In Resolution 242, the conditions were as follows. Israel had to give back all the land that it had taken in that map. Second, as repercussions for that, the Arab states would have to acknowledge Israel as a state. Israel would have to recognize them as states, Israel would have to recognize Palestine as a state, and the Palestinians would have to recognize Israel as a state. It didn't work out so well because there are still settlements disputes today. So, there are still settlements disputes today. So much so that this is the change. The second picture is what it was after the 6 Days War, and the increased settlements and intrusions into Palestinian land has reduced it to the one on the far left. Thank you. They're looking for a peace agreement. They keep on fighting, and they still fight to today. President Clinton was the closest person to negotiate a peace between Palestine and the Israelis. Yasser Arafat was the leader of the PLO at the time when Clinton was in charge, and there was a deal on the table that would make peace. Israel was offering more land than it ever had before, and it would never offer as much land as it did today. The last day, Yasser Arafat, he asked for more land. And of course, the United States and Israel would not take the deal anymore. A few days later, Clinton got a phone call in the White House, and he was talking about how, he said, President Clinton, thank you so much, I'm sorry I had to do that. You'll be remembered as a great man. And then Clinton said, I will be remembered for nothing because of you. Yasser Arafat died in 2005, and he was replaced by an organization that uses extreme means to get for liberation called Hamas. And they are still fighting to today. Today I talked about the history of Israel. First, we talked about how the stage was set for Israel during and after World War I. Second, we talked about how Israel came into being out of the fire of World War II. And then we talked about how conflict between Palestine and Israel clashed during the Cold War and after to the present. I hope you enjoyed today's speech, and you will vote you will use your vote wisely with this knowledge. Thank you.